Yes, all of you lovely people. We are going to be doing the keep loan sell for the upcoming season with Thomas Frank as the new manager. Plenty of decisions he's going to have to make, and we get to make our own. That's the fun in it this summer. Looking forward to doing this. We have plenty of players to get through, so we'll be as efficient as we can. Do smash the like button for us. Please get into the comments if you disagree with any of our decisions over this, because there will be some tricky ones. There'll also be some
Mhm.
easier ones as well. Let's get straight into this. Let's go first with actually some younger players at the top of the team sheet here, Dave. We have some young guys like Mikey Moore, Will Lancashire, Dane Scarlett. Mikey Moore, I don't think you can even loan him out yet because he's not even 18, right? So I think it's an obvious keep.
Yeah, look, for me, I don't think we should loan him out anyway. I think when you look at what we've got around the club, he's clearly the most prestigious talent we have, and I think it's good to keep him in and around the first team. There's plenty of games next season for us to play again. There's going to be minutes there for him, and if Frank's a developer of players, I think Mikey Moore is one he can't wait to get his hands on.
Now, Will Lancashire, I would loan out. I just worry, though, if he could go down a similar path to what we had with Dane Scarlett, where you're not giving him, let's say, the best loan destinations, because that's the key point, right? You have to give him, the opportunity at a club that will give him minutes, will give him play time. And what sometimes happens is the manager that might have promised play time ends up getting fired or sacked. And then all of a sudden, the new manager comes in, doesn't care at all about, what he could be doing for a loanee or something like that. So I think you have to be careful with these type of situations. But Will Lancashire, for me, it looks like he needs minutes, I think, away from the club before he comes back.
Yeah, I agree with that, Jack. Just quickly on that, I think, with the under 21s is where he garnered the reputation, but I've always made the argument it was Donnelly that supplied the chances. He had a lot of easy tap ins to a large degree. And I think when you look at him all around, he's not good enough, anywhere near good enough right now to be leading that line in any sort of game. So he needs long time to develop.
Now, Dane Scarlett, Dave, is it now the time to sell, or is there maybe one last chance for him?
Do you know what, Jack? Based off some of the impact he had for us last season, I would loan him out for another year. I think there is a player in there, clearly. The Europa League, he scored a goal. I remember he came off against Ipswich, contributed off the bench with an assist. I think I would loan him out for another season.
An opportunity abroad might be actually good for him. It seems like every time we've given him to like a championship club or League One club, it's not always seemed to work out for him, or he's
Yeah.
not necessarily been given the minutes that we would have liked, as the parent club. Maybe he just needs an opportunity away from England.
Mm. Yeah, look, it could be the case, Jack. Look, for me, stop
He's
sending them to
yeah.
clubs that have problems or have big budgets that they can go and replace them. Send them to a club that actually genuinely need a guy.
Oh, totally. Mickey Van de Ven, obvious keep.
Keep,
Brandon Austin, I think, is a keep as
keep.
well. I think he's replaced Alfie Whiteman as the homegrown club trained, which is very important as well for the Champions League campaign. And he's proven just to be a lot better,
Mm.
I think, than Alfie Whiteman. He's actually decently serviceable. Kinski, we'll talk about Josh Keeley later, is a keep. I think Kinski is a keep. But maybe since we did mention Josh Keeley, Dave, what do you do with him? I think he's a little upset that maybe Kinski even came to the club in the first place. So what's Keeley's future looking like? Those are too easy to mix up. What do you
Do you
make
know
of
what?
Josh Keeley?
Yeah, do you know what, Jack? I think it could come down to a battle of maybe what Keeley wants and what the club would prefer. I think the club would prefer to loan him out. Look, he's not going to get in right now ahead of Austin, Kinski or Vicarian. There's no point in keeping him around as a fourth, fifth choice goalkeeper with no game time. So I think they will look to loan him out, but it could be a case where he might force his move.
Yeah, I think that's probably maybe another loan opportunity for him. But then after he gets that loan, you wonder if he's just going to plan to move on a permanent after that. I put Vicario in an obvious keep. Ben Davis, now I would sell. I don't think the club is going to sell. They do their very best to try to keep this guy, even when it feels like, the writing's been on the wall, I feel like, for a long time. I don't really understand why he's called Mr. Reliable. I think he tends to revert to type plenty of times, but that's just my bias towards the guy. I would sell Dave. It's our opinions. It's not necessarily
I would
always what we
sell,
think the club would do.
but the club have given him a contract extension,
Yeah.
which means he's staying anyway.
Exactly. Poro, I think, is an obvious keep. Pop Matasar, some people didn't like him, this last season,
He's
but I
not going
think you got
anywhere.
to give him a new chance under another manager.
Frank will appreciate Papa Matasar's skill set. He's an engine room sort of player,
Yeah,
and Frank needs that in his team. He likes hard workers, players that are humble, and but Papa Matasar embodies that.
well said. He absolutely does. Now, Jet Spence, I think, is an obvious keep. I did
Yeah.
mention this, though, like he's got that bit of an ego about him. I think a good ego, and that he backs himself and he wants to play, right? It's always good to have guys like that
Mm.
who are desperate to play and get minutes, but I wonder how he'll handle competing with Poro, competing
Yeah.
with Udogie, because he seems to get a little bit frustrated maybe when he's not given the opportunities that he would like. And I wonder how Thomas Frank would respond to that. But
Mm.
I think Jed Spence, when we talk about backups versus competition, this guy embodies the word competition. He's by no means a backup. He's a guy that will push Poro, will push Udogie for their starting place. And it's good to have that
Mm.
culture.
No, 100%. I think we're in a privileged position actually in fullback. You've got three fullbacks that are all, can all start any given day due to their own right and their own ability. So you got to keep that. You got to keep Jed Spence.
Brennan Johnson, I think, is a keep. We'll see how he can do
Frank
under
wanted him
Thomas
out
Frank.
Brentford, didn't he? So, he's going to enjoy working with him.
Wilson Odebear for me is a keep. I
You
had
mentioned him.
someone mentioned putting him out on
Frank
loan,
mentioned him.
but I mean, to put him out, someone did mention putting him out on loan. It might have been Shawnee Maddox or something, but like, I think that would show that's a huge failure of a signing then, to have signed him for the fee that we did to then loan him out the following season. I just don't know if that would be good for Odebear and really good on Johan Lange, the guy that brought him in the first place. So I think he's got to be a keep.
I'm pretty sure Thomas Frank also name checked him when he was name checking Bergvall, Graham, players like that. So it seems like a player that he's going to keep around. He's really excited to work with.
He also name checked the likes of Bentancur, so we know
Yeah.
that he's going to be a keep. Kulusevski is an obvious keep for me as well.
Yeah.
Christian Romero, now we feel strongly about keeping this guy. We know plenty of people would put him in the sell category.
Well, we're manifesting he's staying, so he's going in keep.
Yeah, exactly. Dominic Solanke was name dropped by Thomas Frank. We know he's a keep. I would definitely keep him as well. Now, Radu Dragic, Dave, this is a fun one and a spicy one. I know you're not totally sold on the guy. I think you've even called him the Romanian Eric Dyer, just maybe better looking and better hair. What do you make of Dragic? Would you sell? Can you even sell? He's still recovering from an injury, so I'm not sure if it's even possible.
Look, I'll be honest, being here a year and a half, it is approaching a decision time on Radu Dragic. However, I think Thomas Frank will want to keep him around. I think with Thomas Frank, he is known for having a defense that's aerially dominant. You don't attribute that to Romero or Van de Ven. They're more your silky sort of defenders. So there is a chance for the likes of Radu Dragic and Kevin Danzo here to try actually break up that partnership and one of them get in. So I do think he will look to keep Radu. At the end of the day, Romero, Van de Ven, Danzo, and Radu, well, minus Radu, the other three, they're actually not bad options whatsoever, Jack.
No.
I think Radu has a point to prove this season, though, and if he doesn't, he could be turfed out the door.
Destiny Udogie was name dropped by Thomas Frank. I think he's another obvious keep. I think this guy could potentially thrive under Thomas Frank. It would be nice to see if he can improve his crossing ability, since we know that's such a key asset and principle of a Thomas Frank's play style. James Madison's an obvious keep for me. I think this guy's also becoming more and more comfortable. It seems like he really, I don't know how to put this in the right way, but he seems to really just enjoy being a Spurs player, like with his interviews, and kind of like after the trophy. It just is like, his foundation where he did the golf tournament. The guy is like just, I think, really settling in as like a Tottenham Hotspur star. He needs to have a good season this next season, but I don't know. Like he seems like a guy that's becoming settled in.
I think Frank will unlock him, though, Jack. I think you look at Madison's skill set, it's the passing, playing the ball between the lines. And I think, he will use Madison in that sort of way. So I think he'll get a lot out of James Madison this season. Bergvall is, of course, another one that was name-checked by Thomas Frank. He was excited to work with and arguably up there for Tottenham's player of the season. So he ain't going anywhere.
Lucas Bergvall, an obvious keep. Basuma, for me, is a sell, Dave.
Well, Thomas Frank didn't mention him, and I would argue, based off what we've seen since his arrival, he's been very disappointing, and it's time to cash in.
He's a winner. He got us a trophy, but the guy is he's just all over the place. You just don't know what you're going to get from Yves Basuma, and I think I've gotten a little bit tired of that, to be perfectly honest.
Well, Frank embodies hard work. He said it in his interview, didn't he? Work hard out of possession, and if he doesn't, he calls them in for interviews. I feel like Basuma will be in there every day and consume Thomas Frank's time, so you got to get rid of him.
Thomas Frank did mention that he enjoys having a beer, but I'm not too sure if Thomas Frank enjoys having a balloon, let's say, like Basuma did. Dave, Richarlison, you and I would want to keep him. I think a lot of people, like maybe in the case of Romero, though, would want to sell Richarlison. How do you feel about Richie?
Do you know what it is, Jack? I'm going to base this off Thomas Frank. Thomas Frank has clearly stated Dominic Solanke is his number one striker by name checking him in that interview and saying that he's going to get him to score goals, which makes me think Richarlison won't be too happy with that. And I think it's come to a point where I actually think they're going to sell Richarlison this summer.
Okay, well, maybe we'll put him in the sell category then. But I feel like the two offer good competition for each other in that they're similar, in that they both are kind of ideally Fox in the box, big men, in the penalty area type of strikers. And also Richarlison, I think is just so good in the air. It's just something that I don't think I can rave about enough with him. He's really, really, I think, exceptional in the
I
air.
love
And I think
Richarlison.
I think Frank would get a lot of use out of that, but you might be right.
I think so too, Jack. But I just think the fact that Thomas Frank has stated Solanke,
Yeah,
that almost thing's number one striker. And if you're Richarlison, you're like, look, it's going to be a long, long, hard season here, you know. But I
totally.
would hope that Richarlison holds his head, realizes there's going to be another 60, hopefully another 60 game odd campaign, and that there's going to be minutes there somewhere for him. And he's just got to take them and keep knocking on the door. But it's a bit like the Duran and Watkins situation at Aston Villa. How long is the second choice really going to stick around when he's scoring goals?
Totally. Archie Gray's a keep.
Yeah.
Sonny, take it away, Dave. I personally would keep him for another season, but everyone, it seems like I'm in the minority opinion now.
Well, look, I predicted it 7 months ago, Jack, that this guy was on his way out the door. Tottenham never offered him a new contract, only offered him the contract extension, which straight away signaled to me they're going to look to cash in on him this summer and receive some money for the time and effort they put into Sonny over the years. Also, the fact that Thomas Frank never name checked him in the interview. Every
Yeah.
other manager that's
Yeah.
walked in the door has said Kane and Son, or Postecoglou with Son's case as well, wasn't name checked. And I think it's clear, that with
Yeah.
inside the club, there's reports that it's Son also sort of is on the side that he wants to leave. And after Korean tour, he'll be on his way out the door. We'll cash it in.
If he wants to leave, let him go. If he's happy to stay, I'd say
Yeah,
you let him stay.
100%.
And with the Champions League campaign, just having a star man like that, maybe just for one more season, I think could be very, very useful to Thomas Frank. Somewhat that sort of experience. And also, we just know on his day, real top level ability as well. So
Mm,
I think you'd be great to keep around for one more season, especially with Champions League football and knowing how Spurs operate in the transfer window. Sometimes we don't usually necessarily get the
yeah.
players that we might, anticipate, getting or dreaming of getting. Matisse Tell's an obvious keep. He was signed.
Yeah.
Danzo's a keep as well. I'm looking forward to seeing Danzo in this next
Yeah.
season. And I
Some
think
banter.
kind of like James Madison, Dave, just someone who seems to be happy at the club.
Yeah, look, why wouldn't you be? You're only newly at. I'd be worried if he was already pissed
That's
off
very
at the
true.
club only after being signed in January. But you know what? I think he's happy with what he's achieved last year. Not a bad move for him, moving to the club that ended up winning Europa League.
Definitely.
Be interesting to see next season. I think he's one to keep an eye on. I think he genuinely does pose a threat to Romero and Van de Ven, especially if he continues to improve.
Totally. Alfie Dorrington, I think you got to put him out on loan again,
Yeah.
just let him develop. He's a good ball playing center back, good on the ball, has, the ability to play on the left side of a back four as well. But I think he's a guy that just needs experience, away. You
Do you
don't
know
want
what
to
I
just
think?
keep him sheltered up.
Do you know what I think? Sadly, is always going to go against him at Tottenham, though, Jack. He's not the biggest imposing looking of centre halves. And I think that will always go against him. I think every manager that walks in here will always look at that and go, Premier League, physical, think of some of the strikers up against your Chris Woods, stuff like that. And I think that's where they're ultimately, I fear this kid won't get his chance at Tottenham, but I do think they will loan him out again this year.
Well, with that sort of attributes that you're saying, maybe he, benefit from a loan, away from, again, England, go
Mm.
to like a Spain, in Italy or something, where you can, really get the most out of maybe a
Well, he's
technical
had a good loan
center
spell.
back. Yeah.
Look, good loan spell. Won a cup in Scotland, beating Celtic in the final. Not bad.
Jamie Donnelly, I would love to keep him.
Oh, look, I don't want to see this kid go out on loan. I think he offers something
I
that
think he's ready.
we lack in this team. He's a guy that gets on the ball and can spray passes left, right, and center and can produce, sublime goals as well. For me, we really lacked that solid creator last year, that consistent creator. And for me, I think Jamie Donnelly's one of them. I think whoever gives him that, and I hope it's Tottenham, but whoever gives him that opportunity, I think he could go on a similar trajectory to a Cole Palmer. Once you give him the opportunity, he won't look back.
And also when you talk about service into the box, crosses into the box, this guy's got a wand of a left
Yeah,
foot. He's someone that is going to take risks, as well. He's not just going to pass it sideways. He's going to
yeah,
try to play, a dangerous pass. Like you said, Cole Palmer, a bit the same, is not afraid of giving it over or, giving up the ball or turning the ball over. He attempts things. He tries things, Jamie Donnelly.
yeah,
And I'm looking forward to that under Thomas Frank. I want to keep him personally, but let us know,
yeah.
everybody. I think that's one of those other trickier ones that I think there's going to be plenty of debate about in the comments. So would like to see what you guys have to say. Brian Hill Messi, I think we all know it's come
I
to an
wouldn't
end. I
know.
think he's a sell. I don't even think he has a Spurs number anymore.
No, I don't think he does. I think you told me that before the stream. That I think what did you say, Matisse Tell took his number. However, I'm not gonna lie. I would love if Thomas Frank looked at him and said, you know what? Because if they're going to give Solomon another chance pre-season, I'd love him to have a look at my little Gil Messi because I still believe in him.
George Abbott, he had a brilliant loan spell, but
Mm.
do you give him another loan spell?
Yeah, I would give him another loan spell. I think, look, fantastic loan spell at Notts County. Some of the highlights he's got from there, absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah,
And to
too
be
good
honest,
for them.
he
Yeah,
actually took to the loan spell and performed way above my expectations of Abbott. But I think the next step is League One
championship.
Championship again, and let's see how he gets on.
Yeah, give him to a mid-table championship side and see how he performs there. Young Min Hook, I think another loan as well. I think QPR, he didn't seem to do too bad or too great, by the looks of the things, but I think probably just another spell in the championship, if anything.
Yeah, look, the kid's nowhere near ready. He actually still looks like a kid. I think, he needs to bulk up, go out on loan, prove that he can handle the physicality, but he will not go out on loan until after the Korean tour.
Yeah, and he yeah, that's true. But he popped up with goals, which is a good sign. He wasn't just completely dead, during his time, in the championship. Did pop on with goals. I just think you got to give him another loan spell for sure. Ashley Phillips, someone that we've forgotten about, but has done okay with his loan spells, you would say. Like a lot of people have high praise for him in the championship. Do you just keep loaning him to the championship? Do you let him go abroad? I think it's probably another loan spell for him, to be honest.
I think as long as Ben Davies is here, I think they'll continue to loan Ashley Phillips out. I do think, he's one that maybe they look. It was a good loan spell for him last year. He improved in terms of the physicality, even his ball playing ability. I think they will send him out on loan, but I think he might surprise Frank to a certain degree. I think Frank might like him, the size of him and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, huge error, huge howler on my part, everybody. Huge apologies. Forgot to add Luka Vuskovich, Dave. What would you do with him?
Yeah, look, Luka Vuskovich, I think the idea would be for him to come straight into that first team. You look at him, the guy's been a man since he's like 14 years of age. He's ready. He's been out on loan to a couple of clubs now since we signed him from Zagreb. And even at Zagreb, he was in their team, starring in their team. He's now I think he recently made his Croatia debut as well, if I'm correct. So for me, he's one that will walk straight into this first team. He's already ready. The only thing that might take him time to adapt is the speed of the Premier League.
Totally.
But if he has great reading in the game, which I think he does, then you don't necessarily need the speed.
Also, just to mention this, he's clearly brilliant in the air, Luka
Yeah.
Vuskovic.
He's an
And
animal.
Thomas Frank got a lot out of his center
Yeah.
backs when it came to aerial presence, right? So just
Think
someone to have
Milenkovic
around
at
like that.
Forest.
Kitchen sink time.
Think Milenkovic at Forest. Very, very similar.
Yeah, that would be fun to see Thomas Frank get the most out of the center backs, in the aerial department. Alejo Valise, I'd
He'd
argue
be
maybe
sold.
sell. Yeah.
He'd be sold. Look, he's had a couple of loan moves away. His last one, he spent, nowhere near the team. The first one didn't go well either. And I think he's one that they're going to sell back. But Paul Mark, if you're watching, I need an explanation behind this because you told me this guy is absolutely the real deal and it hasn't worked out at Tottenham. Now, look, there's a history of that. I'm not blaming Feliz. It probably is more on Tottenham's fault, but it hasn't gone well for him into Europe. Maybe it's just the case come to Europe too soon.
Maybe that. He had a lot of passion, you could tell. Like he played with his heart on his sleeve, worked hard, seemed to really care, but it's just the
Did he
ability
score
just
or
wasn't
assist
really
and then
shown.
got injured? Didn't he score, assist, and got injured? I think Højbjerg left him
Yeah.
short on a pass.
Yeah.
And then, which was unlucky because it just looked like maybe he's about to get going and then that happens.
Monor Solomon, I would sell personally. I just think the injury record, shows that maybe he's not worth keeping around. I also think, as maybe Eugene has pointed out in a lot of live streams, shout out Eugene, we have so many wingers in this, team. We need to make room for guys of a real proven quality. Monor Solomon seems to be a fine player, but, I think we need to make room for Semenyo and Mbumo. We were talking about Muhammad Kudus, behind closed doors, today. Like, I just think we need to make room for one of those guys, and Monor Solomon would have to go then.
Hear what you're saying, but reports coming from Hotspur way is that apparently they're going to give him preseason and test him out. And I think it kind of comes back to the theory that I had in the first place. He was injured at Fulham, and then when he joined us, he was injured again. I actually think the idea behind loaning him out was for him to go and prove his fitness. He'd done that at Leeds, and I think that's why he's earned preseason. Okay. But I agree with you. If we're getting Semenyo and Buemo and stuff like that, sell him on.
Yeah. And then lastly, Alfie Devine.
Sell. He's 20 years of age, couple of loan moves, hasn't really stood out, he sort of struggled at Plymouth. Then he's been loaned out to the Belgian team. He's had an all right season there. But look, I think ultimately the club will probably loan him out one more year. But I do think, looking at him, I'm not sure he's going to make the grade at Tottenham. And I wouldn't be surprised if they were to sell him this summer, Jack.
Well, everybody, those are all our decisions. I think we try to be as efficient as we can. Of course, there are plenty of ones you might have disagreed with, maybe ones that we even glossed over that you thought, oh, hold on, where are you going with that one? So please let us know in the comments, everybody. And do smash the like button on your way out. And once again, thank you for all the members for supporting us on this journey and supporting us throughout the summer. All your support really does help us out a ton. So thank you guys. And we'll see you all on the next one. Come on, you Spurs, and
Come on, you
best
Spurs.
of luck to any of these guys, especially the ones out on loan. Definitely best of luck to them. Hopefully they can develop for us.